All right, first we're gonna just test some of these tools. See, that didn't work. Thought Alt P. Oh, there's my pen. I wonder if I can change the color. Blue's okay. Oh, it does work. Nice. That's a good one. All right. Hello, this is Mrs. Ness-Deden, and today we're going to talk about ecosystems and energy. This is one of the first topics in this unit that is probably completely new to you, at least the parts we're going to get into more today, and is a little bit challenging for some students. So take your time as you work through it. Use your resources. We are looking here at the first part of chapter 42 in your textbook, so that's a good resource for you. And feel free to ask questions. And we're going to continue talking about this over the next couple days as well. Before we get started here, I don't know how to get back to my cursor, so we're going to pause this video again so I can look at my shortcuts. Return to mouse cursor, M. All right, start that over. So I can go hide that. And let's see, hide mouse when not moving is H. Okay, let's try this again. Hello, AP Bio students. Today we are talking about ecosystems and energy. There are some concepts that we're going to get to today that are probably new for you. And this section is sometimes a little bit challenging for people. So I just want to point out this is part of chapter 42 in your textbook, kind of the first 3 sections. So that's a really good resource. If you need to go back and read more about this or kind of look things up, of course, you can also always look at this video again and kind of go through the parts that are kind of challenging. So to start with, I want you to take a minute and think about photosynthesis. Last week, at the end of the week, we were working on a lab looking at the process of photosynthesis and the things that plants take in and give out in that process. So take just a minute and review that first. So the process of photosynthesis happens in plant cells in the chloroplast. So you should have kind of talked about that. And I don't need to say all of that. That's going to make my video too long. So we're going to start over again. All right. Nope. Alt. That's it. One more time. Hopefully last time. Hello, AP Bio students. Today we are talking about ecosystems and energy. There are some concepts today that we're getting to that are probably brand new to you and are sometimes a little bit challenging. So I just wanted to start by pointing out where we are in the textbook. This is the first part of chapter 42. And so that's a really good resource to go back and read about this again, maybe hear it explained in a slightly different way from what I am going to talk about. So as we get started, I want you to begin by thinking back a little bit to what we were talking about at the end of last week. You were doing some experiments related to photosynthesis. So take a minute just to review that process because it'll be important to have that in your mind since photosynthesis is obviously an important part of how energy enters an ecosystem and a food chain in the first place. also want you to take a minute and review a little bit of basic vocabulary related to ecology. These are words that you should have seen before. Take a minute and kind of see if you can put them in order from smallest to largest. And if there are any words on this list that you don't remember what they mean, please take a minute and go and look these up right now. These are things that you should be familiar with as we move further into this part of this unit, which contains a little bit of ecology. All right, and one more thing to discuss as we get started. There's a diagram on your screen right now, and I just want you to take a minute and make some observations. This is an energy pyramid, so this is one way to represent some things about the flow of energy in an ecosystem. See what you remember about this, and see how much you can explain about what's going on in this diagram. So hopefully as you looked at this, you remember a little bit about how energy moves through ecosystems. Most of the energy in an ecosystem starts with the sun, and is converted into kind of usable energy through the process of photosynthesis. So this first arrow down at the bottom represents photosynthesis, and the producers are the ones that are carrying out that process. The energy from the producers then flows upwards through this energy pyramid. The producers are eaten by the herbivores. This is our first level. These are also referred to as primary consumers. And then it continues to move up to the carnivores of various levels, up through this pyramid. You'll notice at each level that some of that energy is lost as heat. Over here on the side, it says heat energy loss, and that happens at every level. And so as that energy goes into plants, they use some of that energy for their life processes. Remember, it is important to be careful of this word loss. Energy does not totally disappear. It's not lost from the universe. But when energy turns into heat, it's essentially lost from the food chain and from the ecosystem. It's no longer usable by the consumers that come later. So that's what we mean in ecology when we say that energy is lost. Some of that energy also eventually ends up going to decomposers, who take the last little bits out of all of these organisms after they die. They get kind of the last little bit of energy, and recycle some of it back through the soil to the producers. You may, in your discussion, have also talked about the idea of the 10% rule, if you remember what that is. We're going to get back to that probably tomorrow, but if you already mentioned it, that is also illustrated in an energy pyramid. So we will get there pretty soon. Last couple words, take a minute here. If there are any of these vocabulary words that you are not familiar with or don't remember what they mean, please pause your video right now and go and look them up, because we're going to start using some of this vocabulary as we talk about food webs and food chains and how energy flows through an ecosystem. So pause and look these up if you need to. So you should remember the basic flow of energy, kind of those things that we just talked about, and food webs and food chains. Those are all pretty familiar to you. What we're going to talk about today is the idea of an energy budget. Within an ecosystem, there's only a certain amount of energy that the organisms have to work with. And that amount of energy is called primary productivity. You can think of this. So primary productivity is the amount of energy at the bottom of this pyramid. You can think of that kind of the energy that's captured by the sun, kind of like all the money you make at your job, right? That's all the money that you've got to deal with. And then you need to make some decisions about how you budget that energy and what you use it for. That happens in an ecosystem too. And obviously an ecosystem doesn't make decisions the same way that we do, but it only has a limited amount of energy to work with. And that energy is set right at the bottom of the pyramid. That's called the primary productivity of an ecosystem. And that determines how many consumers there can be further up this food chain. Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the term for, oops, sorry, that was the wrong thing to do. There we go. Gross primary productivity is a term for the amount of energy converted to light energy that's converted to chemical energy per unit time. In other words, the easiest way to think of gross primary productivity is the rate of photosynthesis. So gross primary productivity is really represented by this big blue arrow right here. And my letters might be messy, but I'm going to label that on there. So this represents the gross primary productivity. It's kind of a measurement of the amount of photosynthesis that's happening in an ecosystem. How much energy is actually being captured by those producers and turned into glucose through that process of photosynthesis. From that point, though, hang on, forgetting my shortcuts here. Thanks for bearing with me. All right. Once that energy is captured in producers, though, we have to think a little bit about what those producers use it for. So over here, we have a diagram of a plant cell. And as you hopefully remember a little bit, the process of photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast of a plant cell, right? So light energy comes in here. And the chloroplast, these green organelles in here, take that light energy and convert it into glucose. So then you have all these molecules of glucose, which I'm just going to draw as some little blue circles, floating around here in the cell that were made by those chloroplasts. And they're all over the place because all the chloroplasts are making them. Some of those molecules of glucose then move into this organelle. These pink organelles here, these represent the mitochondria, which I'm sure you remember as the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria breaks down that glucose and turns it into energy that can be used by all of these other organelles, by the ribosomes and the rough ER and the smooth ER, and all of those other things to do all of the jobs the cell needs to do to help it grow and replicate itself and all of that kind of stuff. But you can see there's some glucose that still just hangs out and remains floating in the cytoplasm. Not all of the glucose is used by the plant. And so we call that energy that's kind of left over after the plant uses what it needs, we call that the net primary production, because really this glucose that's still floating around there, when someone eats this plant, that's the glucose that the consumer has available to break down and use for our energy. If you have a salad for lunch, you're using this leftover glucose to power your body. So the term for that is net primary production. And these two obviously are related. Net primary production is the energy that's available to consumers in the ecosystem. So in other words, like we just kind of explained in that diagram, it's the gross primary productivity, all of the glucose that they make, all the photosynthesis that happens, minus the energy that they use for their own processes. It's the stuff that's left. This is an important measurement for ecologists because really it's the net primary productivity. That's the amount of energy that moves upwards through the food chain. So this is really what sets the budget for the rest of the ecosystem and kind of determines how many consumers are able to survive in that ecosystem. You can also measure this in a different way. You can measure it by the amount of new biomass added within a period of time in an ecosystem. So there are other ways to measure this besides just the chemical processes. You can actually add the amount of mass that's appearing in there as well. A good way to visualize the relationship between these two is just to think of it in terms of this energy pyramid. This is kind of the easiest way to look at it. When we have, I did it again. Sorry. Still learning my keyboard shortcuts, guys. There we go. So when we look at a basic energy pyramid like this, the gross primary productivity is the amount of energy that is coming into the producers from the sunlight, right? It's the amount of photosynthesis. So you can think of all this energy that moves in as the gross primary productivity. Those producers then take that energy that they've captured from the sun, they turn it into glucose, and they break down some of that glucose and use it through the process of cellular respiration. Once that has happened, it's no longer available to the rest of the chain. So in order to convert kind of between these two, the net primary productivity is the gross primary productivity, everything that came in at the bottom, minus the amount of that energy used for respiration. So if we draw another arrow, kind of the amount of energy that's available to move up from the primary consumers to the producers, that represents the net primary productivity. And this visual right here, I think is just the simplest, clearest way to understand these two concepts and kind of keep this all straight. Today, you're going to be looking at a virtual lab that kind of investigates this idea of primary productivity and the difference between gross productivity and net productivity. So keep these definitions in mind as you begin working on today's virtual lab activity. We will be continuing to talk about this some more tomorrow. Feel free to go back and read in the textbook if you would like a little refresher or to hear this explained another way. And I will see you tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.